Today on the Playbook Podcast, how well is President Trump's peace plan in Gaza really going? Dasha has got the goods. The government shutdown is winding down. The Senate passed its funding bill last night. And how do you lobby Donald Trump if you're a member of his government? We have the most fun story you'll hear all day. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, November 11th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Hello, Dasha. How you doing?
Oh, happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day. Yes, indeed. We will hear from Donald Trump later this morning. He will be making the traditional 11 a.m. speech and laying a wreath that he expects and all the important things that happen on Veterans Day when people pause to remember members of the United States military and all around the world for their service. But Dasha, what I want to talk to you about today is not war, but peace. And how the peace plan is going in Gaza, because we have published a story on Politico's website based on leaked documents that you have seen. Just set the scene for us. Just tell us what it is, what these documents are that you've got hold of, and what they can tell us about how the peace in Gaza is actually going.
Yeah, so this is reporting with my colleagues, Ali Tusi, Felicia Schwartz, and Paul McCleary. We obtained some private documents that have been circulating among U.S. officials that really underscore a lack of a clear path forward in Gaza. We obtained 67 slides broken down into 6 segments that were presented during a 2-day symposium for U.S. Central Command and members of this newly created Civilian Military Coordination Center, the CMCC, which was established in southern Israel as part of the peace agreement between Israel and Hamas.
So these are essentially the important people who have gone into the Middle East to try and keep this peace, to actually make the peace plan a reality, right? Getting together for a meeting to discuss what's the plan, how's it going, where do we go from here?
Exactly. So there are a bunch of different partners coming in. There's state, there's DOD, there are outside groups like the Blair Group and the RAND Group, various NGOs that are all gathered here, about a 400-person gathering for this symposium. Basically what they call like an in-brief, like let's set the table, here's where we're at. And what we saw in these documents indicates that some administration officials are deeply concerned that the peace deal between Israel and Hamas could break down because of the challenges of many of the core provisions of this peace deal. It paints a pretty vivid picture of the hurdles that the administration and its allies in the region face in creating this lasting peace. And it's in pretty stark contrast to the mostly rosy rhetoric that we're hearing from top administration officials. One of the major challenges, Jack, that's laid out here is whether this so-called international stabilization force, like the security boots on the ground that are actually going to try to keep the peace, whether that can really be deployed. In fact, one slide actually shows an arrow with a question mark on it, linking the first and the second phases of the peace plan, basically saying, how do we get from phase 1 to phase 2? That's a big question mark. At the same time, I'll say that the materials also show that the administration is pretty committed to peace. The organizational chart includes documents that detail plans for pretty significant U.S. involvement in Gaza beyond just security, but including overseeing economic reconstruction. Not going so far as the Gaza Riviera that we heard from the president some months ago, but it's extensive involvement, and it raises some questions about how that's going to jive also with the MAGA base and his America First agenda.
It's so fascinating to get this sort of behind the scenes look at what they're really talking about and what they're really thinking about in these crucial decision making bodies. Because when you listen to the president on this, and it's incredible that we've got to the point that we have, everybody in the world wants this peace deal to work.
Right. And no one is arguing that this should be a snap your fingers easy process. That's the point, is this is extraordinarily challenging.
But when you hear him talk about it, you don't always necessarily sort of get that point of view, right? Like, he was very proud, understandably, of the ceasefire and the first phase of the deal. But we were all very clear when we were shown and reporting on what happened, that it was a very tentative first phase that they had agreed. And actually, a lot of the really complicated stuff, the stuff that has, been the cause of friction between these two parties for such a long time, had really been parked for the all-important second phase and probably future phases of a long-term peace agreement, as we hope it's going to be. And this is the stuff that you're talking about. This is what they were talking about in this symposium. And it doesn't sound nearly as simple as you might think it would from listening to the president talk about it, where he's just like, well, if Hamas don't agree with it, we'll go and take them out. Is this basically his language? The peace deal is definitely going to be the last. It's the greatest peace deal ever. He doesn't really get into any of the sort of detail that you're talking about here, but we have US officials on the ground who are struggling with this stuff.
Exactly. And one of the reasons it was striking when we actually got our hands on these materials and started looking through, we had been hearing bits and pieces of folks throughout the administration and allies and partners saying this is nowhere near as clear cut as some of the public rhetoric makes it seem. This goes deep into explaining exactly why it's such a challenge and where there are these massive question marks. I mean, this doesn't really lay out what we saw, any concrete policy solutions. Instead, it lays out a ton of obstacles and asks a whole lot of questions.
Look, the peace in the Middle East is one of the great goals of the world. So I don't want to turn this into a political battle, but as beside the all important goal of ending that conflict long term, there is a political aspect to it because Donald Trump has put a lot of political capital into this. He's put a lot of effort in, which is great. But he talks about it all the time, right? He talked about it in the Oval Office yesterday when he was being asked about the Syrian leader who came to visit, and instantly Trump was saying we now have peace in the Middle East. First time I can remember that happening. He talked about it again on Fox News last night when he did interview with Laura Ingraham. That's twice in just in one day. He talks about it every day. So were this thing to fall apart beyond the horror of it falling apart, there are political machinations here in the US because he states his claim on this peace deal. It's his peace deal. Remember the big signing ceremony in Egypt and all the rest of it. He really doesn't want this to go wrong.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And one of the criticisms of from one of the sources we were talking to was that there's this big picture, 40,000 foot view thinking, but there's a real lack of operations and tactics, the stuff that the machinations that actually make peace enforceable and lasting. There's a lot of talk, and of course, the president wants to tie a big, beautiful bow on it and say, "Give me the Nobel Peace Prize." But in reality, there's, according to one of the people I was talking to, there's just a big division between the idea and the actual implementation. Of course, the administration is pushing back. We got a spokesperson from the State Department telling us that this story, quote, demonstrates a complete ignorance of the workings of the Gaza effort, saying everyone wants to be a part of Trump's historic Middle East effort, and saying they couldn't possibly comment on the contents of thousands of ideas and proposals that may or may not have been reviewed. But again, this is so whenever you get stuff written down, it's just so revealing in the way that that things are framed and positioned. And this was from what we can tell, a pretty frank conversation with the people on the ground about the massive hurdles that they're facing.
Right. Let's talk about some massive hurdles closer to home, shall we?
Let's do
The
it.
shutdown is on its way out. The Senate did indeed vote last night to pass a funding bill, as we expected, and this thing is headed now towards its conclusion. Today, we'll see the House Rules Committee meet to set up a debate and a vote in the House tomorrow on the same funding bill, and the expectation broadly is that that is going to pass. And as we said for you yesterday morning, it looks like the US government is finally going to reopen towards the end of this week. A triumph for DC. It only took them 40 odd days, Dasha, to get there.
And not
Um,
going to help with the airports quickly enough, I'm afraid.
can't come quickly enough for any of us. I agree. The Democratic Party is, the side that has caved in the end, or at least part of it. And we talked yesterday morning about the civil war that was instantly erupting because of those 8 senators that decided to vote to end the shutdown. I think it's safe to say over the last 24 hours that civil war didn't get any quieter, did
No,
it? I
no.
mean,
I think it's certainly escalated. I mean, watching the different factions on the cable news channels over the course of the last 24 hours has really been striking. There is a lot of anger from parts of the party, and a lot of spin and defensiveness, and messaging wars going on here right now.
You bet. And we can see Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer essentially battling once again for his position within the party, even though, to be clear, he very much voted to maintain the shutdown. He's not perceived by many of his party to have done a good job on that. And it's fun to me to see the 2028 wannabe contenders coming out one after another to condemn this deal. I think you talked about yesterday being a sort of test of purity already in the Democratic Party. Well, that is playing out.
I am struck by the level of pitchfork coming at Schumer. He was criticized in May when he voted, not to shut down the government then. But this feels like it has reached a new level. I mean, people are calling on him to step down. It's much more intense than it has been before.
I still think, and we talked about this yesterday morning, that although this is very difficult for the Democrats right now, and people are pointing the finger and saying, what was the point in it all? And you're so weak, you couldn't keep this going. Over the longer term, for the Republican Party, this ACA issue is coming rapidly down the tracks for them, and they've put themselves on the side of not extending, and everyone can see that in the country now. And that, I think, is difficult for them in a situation where people are struggling to pay their bills. Watching President Trump on Fox News last night, and he got a pretty good going over by Fox News standards from Laura Ingraham. I have to say, she did a pretty good job at pushing him harder than he sometimes gets pushed on that channel. But he's calling people he's saying to people who are struggling with their finances, no, it's a con job. It's a con job from the Democrats. Prices are down. If you can't pay your bills, what do you think when your president says that? I don't see how that works well for the White House long term.
I think there are a lot of people around the president that are struggling with that message, but know that President Trump is not going to concede and say things aren't working well under his leadership. That's just not an avenue of messaging that he has in him. So his team have to figure out how to tackle the affordability issue in a different way. And you can kind of feel the knuckles whitening among the Republicans who are in competitive districts, in competitive defending competitive seats if in the midterms next year, especially with this ACA thing coming down the pike. I mean, some of those candidates and campaigns are increasingly sounding the alarm on this, saying this is going to be a real problem for us. We have to figure out how to tackle this issue, because this is the kind of thing that like everyday people actually feel. We talked about how, in the shutdown, it's usually things that millions of Americans experience, like not being able to get on an airplane or being stuck on the runway for hours, people's healthcare premiums going up. Like that is not going to happen to a ton of people. And Democrats are positioning themselves to where they can really point the finger on Republicans for it.
You paint this interesting image of members of the White House and members of the Republican Party wondering how to get Donald Trump to change his mind slightly or something, or convince him to do something differently. As it happens, you've got this belting story that I think we should finish on about a member of the government who managed to do exactly that at the weekend. How do you lobby a man like Donald Trump? How do you convince a man like Donald Trump to come forward with a new policy? Dasha, now there's a way of doing it. Tell us what you learned in the story you published
this
last
gentleman has the secret sauce, and he uses it well, and he uses it well to the consternation of a whole lot of other people around President Trump. Bill Pulte, the Federal Housing Finance Agency director. White House officials are pretty ticked off with this guy because he, according to my sources, is the reason that the president put out this idea of pushing a plan to create a 50-year mortgage that has been widely criticized by industry, has a MAGA world in a tizzy. There's been just a ton of criticism from everyone from Laura Loomer to Marjorie Taylor Greene, a lot of MAGA influencers panning this plan. The way he convinced the president to push this is a visual aid. There's nothing more the president loves than a visual aid. So picture this: on Saturday evening at Trump's golf course in Palm Beach, Bill Pulte arrives with a about 3 by 5 foot poster board in hand that has an image of former President FDR appearing below the words 30-year mortgage, and one of Trump appearing below the words 50-year mortgage. The headline was "Great American Presidents." He shows this to the president, tells him it's going to be an absolutely great idea. It's going to bring housing prices down. Young people will be thrilled about it. FDR did it. You can do it. 10 minutes later, it's on Truth Social from the president's account.
Incredible. How to convince a president to come up with a dramatic new economic policy, a big
He's got
picture
it.
of his head next to FDR showing it's even better. I mean, it tells us a lot about Donald Trump and also about how policy is sometimes made in this administration.
And of course, almost immediately, aides were fielding a whole lot of angry calls. A lot of the White House had no idea that this was coming. Um, yeah,
And Trump didn't even seem to realize it was a big deal, right? When Laura asked him about this on Fox last night, and she put it to him, this 50-year mortgage idea, she talked about, as you said, a significant MAGA backlash, people upset. And Trump was like, it's not even a big deal. He was like, you go from 40 years to 50 years. And she was like, well, actually, it's 30 years, Mr. President. He was like, well, whatever. It's not a big deal. It might help. Like, he didn't seem to appreciate that this is a really significant economic move. If you do that could be quite transformative, not necessarily in positive ways for everyone or everything.
yeah. Well, and White House aides are certainly feeling that this is a big deal. I'm being told that this is they're getting more calls about this than almost anything else the administration has ever done. My colleague Sophia Kai, who worked on this story with me, heard that, quote, during Trump 2.0, the last time anything got as much pushback as this was over the Epstein files. I mean, that is the level of consternation and frustration and confusion, whatever you want to call it, that the White House is getting from MAGA world, which is kind of surprising to me that this has blown into. I mean, it's a huge deal, obviously, for the housing sector that just touches so much of the economy, of course. But it's just fascinating the way that this has blown up, all started by a poster board.
So now listeners, if you want to get policy change in this country, all those well-paid lobbyists who listen to this podcast trying to figure out how to do it, you just got to get in. That's right. And then get it in front of the president on a Saturday night when he's at Mar-a-Lago, and thus policy is made.
We've talked about how this is a very visual president. Visual aids are incredibly helpful in selling an idea.
Yeah. Dasha, thank you so much for that. Thanks for bringing all the scoops today. Thank you all for listening to today's show. We've got lots more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter. You can, of course, find that at politico.com/playbook. And we will be back tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.